You're listening to Errol Parker and Clancy Overall, editors of the Betoota Advocate on Desert Rock FM. Welcome back to the Betoota Advocate radio show, recording live from the Diamantina Shire. Big couple weeks, big couple guests. We've had, in the scheme of things, almost every facet of the Betoota Advocate news reporting format, I guess. We had a legal representative a couple of weeks back. We had Jenny Robinson, Julian Assange's lawyer.
A legal representative, that's what...
A representative of the legal...
That's what you're going to describe, arguably the nation's greatest legal export.
Yeah, that's what I meant. A legal export who also represents West Papua in the High Court.
And Julian Assange.
And Julian Assange. She was a great guest. Talking about your average kind of dentist from above a Chinese takeout restaurant. No, she doesn't. She doesn't have the firm above the laundromat. Following up after her, we had Jason Fu of the Triple Threat Archibald Sulman Win finalist fame. That was an interesting one. So we go from the law to the arts. Haven't had a sport star on for a while. We did have Willie Mason earlier in the year, and then last week Don Walker, arguably Australia's greatest singer-songwriter. Learn a lot about the story of Cold Chisel and the man. Today's guest is here talking design, which is also, I guess, in the scheme of things, something that we would engage with either consciously or subconsciously every single day of our lives. Architecture particularly. Today's guest has made a name for himself in what I would describe as one of the great media career pivots of all time. Tim Ross, thank you for joining us.
It's an absolute pleasure, gentlemen. I loved that chat with Don Walker. You know, I saw Don one day. I was going to see Tim Rogers at the Hopeton when it was still a pub that was open in Sydney, one of those great small band venues. And I was standing at the door waiting for a mate, and he turned up. His name was on the door because he should be on the door. A legend like Don. Yeah. And the girl at the desk, she said, "Oh, my name's on the door." And she said, "What's your name?" And he went, "Don Walker." And she went, "Don who?" And she had no idea. And you think about, he is so modest, isn't he? That I found it fascinating, absolutely fascinating. Anyway, people can go back and listen to that one.
No, it is interesting. I feel like there was people that exist in terms of the heartland rock, and we're already talking about something completely different now. But in terms of the heartland rock, Chisel held that in Australia for decades, for generations. And I think Bruce Springsteen held a similar place in America. And I know that there were people that worked alongside him that wrote these songs that kind of would not get recognised at the door.
Yeah, but I think if you look at Don and those deeply thoughtful songs, and then also the way that, how they connected in a time when those beer barns were everything. And, people were just blind and killing each other. And then there's this underlying beauty to him, and he's dressed the same way the whole time. Like, he's extraordinary. He's a national treasure.
Well, there was one part of that podcast that I really found interesting, was that after Don had moved to Adelaide and was in Cold Chisel in its first incarnations, he decided to move back to Armidale, and the band followed him to Armidale from Adelaide. So I guess, Adelaide isn't that bad that you'd moved to Armidale. So they must have identified very early on that Don was the glue that was going to hold.
So he was going to be the one that made them millionaires.
Grog-soaked band together.
He described it was a hedonist 6 months for them.
While I was doing physics and pure mathematics
at the University of New England.
A glorified TAFE college
and
in New England.
Nossie spent some serious time with Tucker's daughter.
Now,
sorry.
This is great.
Sorry,
we're dealing with, as I said, we're dealing with a radio professional. Effectively, you did many, many, many more hours in the booth than we ever have. You came up that way, but you have asserted yourself, and you probably won't like this description, but I'm going to say it, as an authority in design and architecture in Australia. You obviously have a very big interest in it, but you have a encyclopedic white boy brain, which you very rarely see in people that work in media, who have interests, and you have numbers and data and moments in time, and you can identify so much about this world of architecture and design that some would think that you might have had a job before you were on breakfast radio.
Well, now in this day, if you listen to enough people and read a bit and Google a lot, you can you can have a go and stuff. But I do. I mean, I think if you are interested in something and in terms of Australian design and Australian history, which I have been pretty much my whole life, you sort of pick some things up along the way, and if you listen to some smart people once in a blue moon, you sort of find your way into things. And it's an interesting pivot, but it was something that's always been there. But I was just really lucky, I was really lucky to be able to have I think, a far more interesting second act. Nothing against what I used to do with Mez, but I think there's something far more fulfilling and far more important that I'm doing now than I was doing back then, of course. But, if I came in here today and I was still the 1990s version of myself and I came in, wearing a Grinspoon T-shirt.
Hell yeah. Resin dogs.
Or 28 days or, Area 7, there would be something incredibly tragic about that in some ways. So, yeah, we all hope we move on in some ways, but not in that really, I don't know, tiresome, boring way where I've just
become a talkback shock jock.
This is and that's what happens to people. They get when I'm doing a podcast at night at the moment, and they go, "You sure you don't want to come and have a little bit of a crack at 2GB?" And I'm like, I don't think that's for me, unless I can do the gardening show on a Saturday morning. I think I could do that, but I think people naturally get conservative and they get too deep into
populist.
Oh, well, you get too deep into what you're into, which I can do at times.
Yeah, it's because you usually have something worth conserving, so you become a conservative.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm surprised someone who's made as much money as Kyle Sandilands hasn't become like a raging conservative, because he has a lot to lose. But I guess
most importantly, his ratings.
The idea of remaining progressive as you get older is a really interesting one. Yeah. And I had this mate, Neil Clerihan, who's a fabulous architect, and there was this thing in Melbourne where you get these really sort of progressive. It's a strange Melbourne take is that you can have, and it's just because it's such an old school Thai mentality. So he was a member of the Melbourne Club, right? So he's total Melbourne society. Then he's this really progressive and interesting architect. And he used to drive this old car and he used to leave it out the front of the Melbourne Club with his fake doctor on call sign. But that's where he got all his work from, hang out at the Melbourne Club, do all that stuff. And he used to swim every day, and he was swimming well into his, into his late 80s. I think he died in his early 90s. And his only paranoia in life was that while he was swimming, he would die, and no one would know who he was. So at the age of 82, he went down to the local bong shop, and he got his home phone number tattooed on his chest. So it said 875 whatever.
Yeah, the landline.
But what I found really fascinating, the conversation that came out from his wonderful daughter was talking to me about, he would have been 91 or something when the gay marriage plebiscite was happening. And he had to go pretty deep as a 91-year-old just to go, hang on a second, how do I feel this conservative Melbourne, but also a modernist and a progressive person? And he just went, I'm a progressive person, so I'm going to say yes. Yeah. And so why does that get lost so much? Yeah. Why? And the older you get, the harder you have to hold on to that stuff. And I know it seems sort of might be a strange conversation for some of your younger audience to listen to this, but it certainly would resonate with people when you're watching your mum and dad suddenly turn into something you can't recognise.
Yeah.
So you're saying that he would support the North Richmond injecting room, but wouldn't want to live near
it. Yes, absolutely. 100%.
And he had the means to 100%. Move away from it.
Yeah, it's like if they were going to put one under the Kooyong Tennis Club, he would be like, absolutely not.
Yeah.
I'd rather you just do it on the tennis court like it's the 80s again.
And thankfully people like that have the option now where they can just go to Monique and say, we know that you agree with us, because she's kind of, the teal thing has just nailed that for that particular archetype. The teal is just enough of both. For them.
Where you just go, I feel like I'm doing something. I'm doing the right thing by someone and myself.
Yeah.
And the kids will talk to me if I vote for this person.
It's like if you're an alcoholic and you have a heaps normal. Yeah. It's like, oh, yeah, kind of.
I like the people who, the teal crew, I quite liked seeing them in my neighbourhood. when it all happened, but I draw the line of getting stuck having too many conversations with them because, they...
they care. That's the thing.
It's just like, yeah, that's good. Thanks for wearing the T-shirt. I waved at you when I drove past you, taking my kids to school. But, I've got stuff to do now. Thanks for caring. You made a difference. Let's move on.
Yeah. I'm not overly interested in the Fadden by-election that Stuart Roberts is now bowing out. Like, the thing is, it won't die. And we're dealing with that now. We're in an interesting political climate, as we said before. We've got a generation of kids who probably won't grow conservative like their parents did because asset-wise they're not going to be able to go, like for like with their parents.
Do you reckon it's so asset-driven?
Yeah, I do think
right.
that. You start thinking, you get a bit nervous about these things.
There's just going to be two classes in this country moving forward, the haves and the have-nots.
But I do want to talk to you about this because people care a lot about architecture when it's something they can touch and feel as well. Like anyone who I have met over the years who is that interested in it without being involved in it is usually someone who has employed an architect. You know what I mean? They've employed an architect on their own. That's the more suburban core architecture enthusiast is someone who can who's enjoying that, that art form as something of their own. People come from around the world to look at architecture. People travel to look at architecture.
Yeah, like they go to Barcelona and they go and look at all the Gaudi shit.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that's very much a moment for a lot of people who discover architecture is seeing Gaudi. But how do you find interest with architecture? Young people can't afford to buy anything. Yeah. So where's their skin in the game with it? Or do you think it's more of something to just walk past and marvel?
No, it should. So our best domestic architecture in this country that came out in, say, the 1950s into the 1970s tracks alongside the rise of the middle class.
Yep.
And so this is truly great. So I was doing a show about, motels a while ago, and I was talking about...
The motels were...
Part two of the Australian dream, which was you get to a point where, say 1970s into the early 1980s, and even beyond... the average Australian could find themselves, they get themselves a house, they got a Ford Holden.
XC Falcon wagon.
Yeah. And they go, mum gets a Chimera, and then they go, we've got a little, Nan's passed away, she left us a little bit of money, let's go buy a block of land up the coast somewhere. And then we'll just...
A Luca.
Dad will slowly start stealing some materials from work, and over time you build a little place and you've got a weekender.
Yep. Part
two of the Australian dream, really common, right? That's gone forever.
Yep.
But from the sense is that, the resentment of, boomers, whatever, for having that, but that's the way it was. Yeah. And so really hard, and I keep looking at what happens when to a generation who feel like they can't own a house or whatever. And so where does the architecture come into play? It's the models are broken. So one of the things that, this new series is that we looked at, this is this great development in Canberra. There's two of them, and they're done by this Sydney architect, Michael Dysart, and he's in his late 80s. He's still with us. And one of them, Urambi Village, that we feature. It's cooperative housing. So back in the 70s, and it was a bit easy because the government would just give land away, but they all, instead of the developers taking the money, everyone puts in and they buy a house. And they put together I can't remember, there's 60 houses or something. But then they end up with a pool, they end up with a half-court thing for kids, they end up with more green space than any other thing. And it works better today than probably any development that you will see. And it means that you get better amenity for the same amount of money. So trying to get more affordable housing is trickier. Getting better housing for your buck is what's achievable at the moment. But the models are all broken. So... if you start thinking about how do I get in, we have to rethink all of our housing, and this is where the architecture comes into play. So if your mum and dad's are thinking about how you're going to design a new house or your existing house, if you adapt your house to have a granny flat or your garage turns into something else or into you turn your home office, your garage, half of your garage becomes a home office, or whatever it is that you do, you get a multi-generational home, which means mum and dad your family can stay in the big part of the house. Nana moves into the granny flat. The kids are in the granny flat at some stage, or your house becomes more adaptable.
Yeah.
And so there's small ways that people can say, well, this will work for me. But the density is the issue.
Yeah.
So everyone's going to have to live in apartments. But most of our apartments are shit.
Yeah.
Because they're made for developers and not people. Everyone's the same.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't matter what shitty bricks you put on the front and how many pizza ovens they put in there and, there's a gym and, maybe it's for pool. The plan for every single one of them is the same.
Yeah.
You go to your friend's place in apartments, go, this looks exactly like my apartment.
Yep.
Because that's what investors want, not what people want.
Yeah, and
that's what breaks
I heard there's like almost like a blueprint, particularly in New South Wales, where you can do it without an engineer if you build it by certain parameters. I mean, the shutters on the roadside, you know.
But, you know, and then also when you drive past those apartments, and they're not set back from the road. And that is awful. They're all failures in planning and everything. Yeah. But there are going to be better ways of doing it. And that's where architecture has a role in creating better spaces. What architecture can't solve is cost of building, which is just ridiculous.
So that's
a huge thing.
So tell me, when you look at, and it was a weird place to start this discussion of your new show, Designing a Legacy, to start with the culture wars into the teal movement and then into class disparity
but it's all really linked, you know. I mean, so bang, you know, like if you look at
injecting rooms,
you got governments who are just running away from social housing.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's
it's like if you're a government, you know, you're just trying to get some bang for buck. I mean, and they're so short-sighted.
So this is the biggest issue when it comes to affordable housing.
Yeah.
Right? The biggest issue is once you're in, you don't care anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the issue.
And that's why it's a huge issue. This is great. This is really important. I'm in now. I don't give a fuck.
Yeah. Pull the ladder up.
Yeah. Like I'm in fuel.
Yeah.
You know, it's going to cost me a fortune.
Yeah.
So, and there's a lack of generosity with that. And so so we talk about culture wars.
Yeah.
There has been a 50-year war on the concept of social housing.
Yeah. We shaved it down from 9% of residences to 3%.
Okay.
So I mean, like the first time I ever went to Melbourne was only a couple of years ago. And coming in there on the highway, you just see those gargantuan buildings. And I was like, what the fuck are they? And Clancy goes, this is public housing. This is people in Melbourne can live in the middle of the city. Where if you go down to a place like Sydney, I mean, you'd have to be nigh on like earning like mid 6 figures to live anywhere near the city.
Well, Sydney's the only city in the world, capital city in the world, that doesn't have any social housing within the CBD, and they sold it all off. And the idea of who's in social housing, and this is the problem, right? Is that it's been the housos have been they're dole bludgers, and every. Those key workers, it's like, what do we do with our nurses? What do we do with our policemen? How do our teachers? Why do they have to be on a train for an hour and a half to teach our kids? You know.
Yeah.
You know, it's an interesting, it's a completely bizarre and a very Australian thing. You know, we do have heroes in Australia. Quite often, they are people who will openly laugh about avoiding tax. You know, the Kerry Packers and the Paul Hogans, they're our heroes.
He wasn't avoiding it, Clancy. He was minimising it.
Yeah.
And you'll need your head ready if you don't do it yourself.
But that, you know, even New York, they have that New York strong. The firemen, the cops, the teachers, probably nurses, not so much after the pandemic. They copped a lot of flack. But they were always positioned into, you know, let's provide 17-year leases. Let's do rent control. And I guess with that, you know, you get buildings that are built to be looked at for centuries. Can you tell me blonde brick? The blonde brick was a very Australian apartment block, right? In the 90s, you'd look at a blonde brick, not necessarily housos either, just flats at the end of your street, and you'd think they didn't have a very good rap, the old blonde brick. The blonde brick has aged beautifully.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen anything in history like what we have now, where we're looking at these things that are fucking Meriden shit boxes?
Well, have a look down.
Are they ever going to become something that we look back on and go, "Oh, that was an interesting era"?
It's a really good question. Some of them will be, some of them won't. Some of the ones that most of them will be knocked down.
Yeah,
that's the thing about it. Just this idea that you have, 30 years time, and someone will come and buy them and bulldoze them.
Do it again.
There's this great story about this Danish architect comes out to Canberra, and she's looking out the window at all the housing estates, and she's looking at the landscape, and she just says, "Why are you building slums?" And we just can't help ourselves. And we just, I
mean, surely they're not going to tear down the Herschel Street Meriton in Brisbane. I mean,
Well,
it's one of the tallest buildings we have in Queensland.
They don't know. What's certain is that we made better apartments 100 years ago in some ways than we did today. If you look at things historically, so those high rises that you see in Flemington when you get off the plane and you come off the Tullamarine Freeway in Melbourne, part of that final, for a period of time, that final experiment with high-rise social housing in Melbourne. When they were opened, if you were a kid under, I think it was 10, you weren't allowed to live in them.
Yeah.
Right.
Because they didn't believe that apartment living was right for kids.
Yeah, right.
So we've got this historical aversion to apartments.
Yep.
And that comes back from the post-war period where you see people like Harry Seidler building these apartment blocks and thinking, well, that's what we've got in Europe. And they'd go, well, only poor people and foreigners live in flats. Okay. And so you'd live in a flat for a while and then you'd move into a house. We sold the suburban dream. And so that
quarter acre up in Ryde.
Yeah, and that sits with us forever. And then so now when we suddenly are forced, and some people want to live in apartments, and for lots of different reasons they make sense for people. But there's still that baggage with how we make them because there's been no universal love of them.
Yeah, okay.
So if you look at places in Sydney and Brisbane, you're looking at those apartments from the 1930s, they're so livable.
Yep.
They're so beautiful.
Yeah.
And they're always near train lines.
Yeah.
They've always got great amenity.
And they're built with triple brick too, all those Art Deco ones.
Yeah.
I mean,
and for the most part, you're right, they have been able to just insert Foxtel into them or NBN. They kind of...
And so how do you suddenly say, well, how can we get things so wrong that we can't replicate some of those
Is that a cost of construction thing? Like,
Yeah.
Is an Art
100%.
Deco building expensive to build?
it would blow your socks off if you had to brick do one.
Let's ask the guys who's done a documentary.
Well, let's face it, I'm not a building professional, but there's different ways. It's actually about the intent rather than, there's more. You can still make things without them being, triple brick. There's a whole bunch of ways that they'll save money to make a decent building, but it's sometimes just simply in the race to get in, you can get away with murder.
Yeah.
And people can knock up shitty apartments and people always buy them.
Swing a cat. You can't swing a cat in them. And then, that's... I want to ask if you've seen some sort of a renaissance. I look at Brisbane. People bang on about this hotel in Brisbane, the Carlisle Hotel. It's a luxury hotel in Brisbane. It's going to be one of many. They're building heaps in the
It used to be a lot cheaper when it opened.
Yeah. And
it's like it used to be a $200 a night hotel, and now it's a $900 a night hotel.
But there's a little bit of how that's built. It just looks nice.
Yeah.
There's a pool. People like being there. And Brisbane's doing this now leading into the Olympics. They're going to have a lot of places to stay. And I would have never imagined that a hotel would be a reason that people are flying to Brisbane, but it is.
Yeah.
It's part of a cohesive design ethos in that whole region in James Street, which is well thought out. It's really beautiful, and it responds to the climate.
Yep.
So when you walk out of your room, you're not walking into air conditioning. You're walking into curved archways where the breeze comes through and you can feel you're in Brisbane.
Really?
And so you're not necessarily noticing that when you're there, but it is a reflection of whatever. And also it says, because, the architects have basically said, we're from this place and we are going to design better buildings for our hometown.
Yeah.
And that's what you get in that whole place. So when there's planning and there's cohesiveness to design and it all works together, it's really quite something.
Yeah.
And so that's like an A+ for me when it comes to what our inner city suburbs can look like.
It's effectively low density too, if you look at that as something to actually live. But with these high rises,
and it's around the corner. There's a shitty car yard, and it's not perfect.
Yeah.
And you go one block further, and it's there's people living there, and like Brisbane's
you're in the valley.
It's a mess of development.
Yeah.
Like it's
a young city.
Like it's had to do a lot in a long period of time, and also it's a timber and tin city.
Yeah.
So when you make that jump, it can go from looking like PNG to Sydney in a block.
Yeah.
And that you talk about heritage and holding on to things that are important. Holding on to that sense of timber and tin in Brizzy is really important.
Yeah.
Because there's a great story to be told about that, and those houses are just adorable.
I remember James Street 10 years ago, there was actually a minor council, like a mini council called the James Street Initiative, which was every business agreed, I don't know how the fuck they did this, but every business agreed to pay a levy, and that's what brought them their seafood and steak festivals. They'd close off the street and do those kinds of stuff. And I think there's been something like that happening there for a while where they get some sort of consensus amongst everyone on the strip to avoid it turning into a Hastings Street Noosa where you've got 6 Billabong stores and 13 gelato shops. You know what I mean?
God, you'd really want to see Mum in a one-piece dripping on gelato or whatever itself. It's like,
Camilla's got a big presence.
Yeah, Jaden.
Yeah, Jaden. Yeah. Everyone's Jaden and Camilla. Camilla dresses captains everywhere.
Yeah, those things. I mean, that's
So you are a fan of the Queenslander, the traditional, the pre-Carlisle Queensland
I do.
architecture.
I fell in love with Brisbane through its architecture because it's, it's because of its response to climate, which I think is really important. We can.
So tell me, with the Queenslander,
it's not saying that they work.
Is it on stilts for the breeze underneath or for the floods?
Supposedly, and some people would tell you it works. So, it's some people both. The sense that also you can. It's when it's super hot and you can go underneath them.
Drink cold cans.
And so that gives you that
slab.
extra element. But more important than all those things is that, you should be able to open them all up. And a lot of them didn't have much in terms of insulation. That's more of a problem than lifting them up, lifting them down.
Yeah.
They need some bit. But all that stuff's been retrofitted in. But they're just incredibly important in terms of the story of where people are from. And I think that's... Because if you lose all those elements, what is it? It will look like any other city.
It'll look like a Canberra suburb.
Yeah, or, it'll feel you could be in Singapore rather than Brisbane.
I have noticed that when you drive through the suburbs of Greensland, you'll see every second house is one of those pointy ones that were big in the 2000s, pointy rendered brick.
Yeah.
Which looks completely different to the Queenslander next. There is absolutely no DNA shared between those two. I wouldn't say. You've got an air-conditioned building with a media room and a drive-in garage, and then you've got the stilted Queenslander that's made from...
Queensland does have a long history of both its state government and its councils being all above board, and you're unable to...
the Dean brothers. All we leave is memories.
Unable to grease wheels if you wanted to put a giant square box on your quarter-acre block in Hawthorn. That's fine. You just had to pay someone at the council.
Yeah, that's pretty... I mean, in terms of the city in Brisbane, it's, what's been demolished. But, what's been replacing, some of it's good, some of it's bad. But the interesting thing about those, you got to... When you say there's a Queenslander sitting next to some sort of rendered monstrosity. Maybe they're not a monstrosity. It's someone's home, so let's remember that, which is important. But what drives a lot of that now is property price. So you'll see that what's scarring our suburbs everywhere in terms from a heritage point of view, particularly ones where the councils don't care. So you've got a lot of, say, interwar homes or post-war homes going because you can put a dual lock on your one block.
Yep.
And, the project home companies will come in and you keep one for yourself and you sell the other one, and then bang, or your kids take the other one. And I understand that. And so that's when housing affordability starts to crush the way our suburbs should look.
Yeah.
But if you're listening to this and you just want a house, you probably don't give a shit about whether or not, some...
Yeah.
So, it just becomes sort of middle-class 50-plus-year-olds like me that care about this stuff. But we need to hold on to some of these buildings because they need to tell us a story in the future because... our history is really important, and the reasons that people love these historic suburbs is because people gave a shit back in the day and held on to them.
And Queensland's already lost the corner pubs. You know what I mean? That was a heritage era. The corner pubs were turned into bottle shops, and balconies removed, and they were just turned into bottle shops. That was a law that was in place, and now you'll find Queenslanders flying down to the Rocks in Sydney or down into Fitzroy and doing historical hotel tours. It's like, mate, you had that all through Spring Hill. You had that all through New Farm and West End.
I would trade every Harry Seidler building just to get back every pub that Brisbane's lost.
I had no idea that happened.
Yeah, it was a law. It was actually when bottle shops first came to be. They said you can only own a bottle shop if you have a pub because everyone was just going to turn us into a rum rebellion. And then they just said, well, these guys said, well, we're making more money selling cartons of piss than
than having to
a kitchen. So we just flip this whole thing
into bottle shops.
Yeah.
But you know the hotel associations are this.
Yeah, and Woolies, and obviously Woolies bought out every family that did that. So you'll rarely find many suburbs with a corner pub in Brisbane anymore. But I want to talk to you about Art Deco. It's something that this is an entry point for a lot of people into architecture. It's easy to learn what that looks like.
Yeah, it's instantly recognisable.
Instantly recognisable. This is quite a baby steps for someone who is interested in design, and they kind of start learning things before you start going down the brutalists and all these kind of...
Yeah, but the decorative nature of it is really appealing to people.
Yeah.
And it's so deeply steeped in the romance of Hollywood.
Yeah.
So...
The California bungalow.
Well, if you look at, say, those early films that everyone saw, they're all chock-a-block full of the beauty and the glory of Art Deco. And, of course, they are also this leap forward, you know, this sort of modern thing going on where it's the precursor to what we call modernism now, which is it's steam trains, it's automobiles, all that thing. It's the 20th century, it's the new world. Yeah. And that becomes really appealing to people. And now you look, I mean, it's... people look at those decorative elements, and it's just it pulls your heartstrings. Yeah. And that's all it is to it. You know, like there is something really incredibly beautiful to those moments, the decorative moments of Art Deco.
We were up in Townsville just the other weekend, and we saw pockets of it up there in the deep north. We looked it up actually before you came in. What was that building we drove past? And it was the old Townsville Hospital. It's a perler. And there's a lot of that. And apparently there's a lot of that throughout the north, which they believe came with the Italians when they made a bit of money in the cane fields.
We had this thing like someone like Wagga Wagga. It's chock-a-block full of Art Deco buildings, and most of them built in the 1950s, which is, 30-odd years, 40-odd years before, after.
Yeah, right.
So that you think, oh, that's a beautiful 1930s building, but actually it's a 1950s building, a 1960s building. So
it took someone 30 years
to get there or whatever. You know?
That's part of the course down in Wagga, I guess. I mean, they're always...
I went to Wagga Wagga once. You know,
it's like going back in time.
Yeah. Went to La Paquetta's there, the famous pizza chain. It was a Saturday night, 7:30, and the woman comes out and said, "I'm just letting you know you can have anything on the menu apart from pizza." Oh, what? So, we've run out of cheese. I was like, what? Of all the things you can run out of.
In the Riverina, too.
Yeah. We run out of cheese. Whose job was that?
Jaden?
I love Wagga, but it's the one regional place where the old food revolution didn't really catch on. Sadly.
Do you find
that's
other
why
pockets?
Steve Mortimer left, because of the food, I think.
Yeah, that's why Wayne Carey left. He just couldn't handle the food, the grub. Do you find any other pockets? I remember in Queensland as a young boy hearing about Cooper's Play in South Brisbane. There was a big Dutch-German influence, and that was ethnic enclave related. There was those not. It's kind of they were not climate appropriate. They were damp. But they were like those kind of mud brick type houses.
There's huge elements of that. So the post-war Jewish communities in Melbourne and Sydney, Bondi, St Kilda, Elstonwick. And those houses, the modernism was the architecture that they had experienced firsthand in Europe. And so they came, and then the architects with them, other Jewish architects they'd get them to commission their homes. And then you also have these amazing furniture too. So they'd all get these people, furniture makers, they'd get them to commission these great pieces of furniture to go in for inbuilt cabinetry. So you get these great, I call them super suburbs, where you've got a concentration of better architecture than elsewhere in the country. And it really is whoever's living there is what causes that. And then, of course, you get all sorts of things. And I think when it comes to this sort of snobbery and what a building should look like, everything is trumped by who's in that house. Yeah. So I'm not a big fan of laying judgment on people and how they live. And when I was making my first series for the ABC, we were in Leichhardt, New South Wales, and we're doing a thing on what was, colloquially called the classic Wog mansions. Yep. And they basically,
concrete lawn.
But you just take a brick veneer home and then just twist it a little bit with some columns and
the tiles are a bit
tiles everywhere.
A couple of lines.
Yeah, and
olive trees.
We were hoping Albanese would do it in Kirribilli.
We should. And and to be honest, those buildings should be full of fruit trees, or they should be public spaces, to be a more point. But so, you go to this funny old, and it was a beautiful terrace house that had been tiled within an inch of its life. The beautiful wooden windows and doors had been taken out with these crappy aluminium doors, and there's columns everywhere, and then you walk in on this sort of tile, these yellowy
bit
tile.
of vinyl.
No, you just still into the backyard, through an arch. Arches are back though. This brick arch, and then bang, lemon tree. There's basil everywhere.
Fig.
Yeah. It's just everything. And then you go inside and there's coffee and there's biscotti, and then you there's looking at every photo of the Pope fucking available. Yeah. And you go, this is amazing, and it's so full of life. And as a kid, when I moved to the city from the suburbs in Melbourne, and I'm living in North Melbourne and then later on in Fitzroy, when you pass those houses with vines everywhere and fruit everywhere, they're the houses with action, with love and life. And so no matter what happens in terms of architecture and design and how that's not amazing design, they're the things that are important. So that trumps everything. And they're the houses that we all respond to.
And now all you have is the same houses with all of that gone. The doors being painted like lime green, and there's just like a $2,000 pram out the front.
And a butler's pantry that's bigger than my bedroom growing up, you know. And they just become a thing, and everyone says, you've got to get a butler's pantry because you go, and this brings it back to the same thing as what happens with design is design becomes based on resale.
Yeah, right. So the stone kitchen bench.
That's killing a whole bunch of tradesmen to put in.
Yeah, the one that we haven't really thought too much
about.
But that was a big one for about 10 years. That just get that
the Caesar stone.
Caesar stone, and so those things.
Bring back the chandelier if you're going to fuck.
They do. So that's if you talk about how the world changes how we view things. So you go to Perth. And they love the bling even to this day in their architecture. There's no restraint in materiality.
Right.
And that's all part of that 1980s thing. So if you grew up with any of that, you saw that in Bondi's world.
Bondi, yeah, right.
And you think, I hate the 80s. That stuff was... And then you don't know. They just do it. They can't help themselves. They cannot help themselves. And then you see interiors today in this country particularly. Everything's blingy and everything's showy because people... decided during the pandemic that they wanted their houses to look like restaurants and bars.
Really?
Yeah, mate, case in point, go on to Domain after this is done and look at the state of Peter Hellier's house. I mean, like he had just shit all over the fucking walls. I got lights coming off the roof.
What, has he got the salon hang?
I can just...
Poor Petey.
It's like... Mate,
is that the St Kilda one?
Oh, mate, no, it was that one that was like, all of us are like, how the fuck, this giant house, like, I think it was that one he sold in Ferntree Gully out the back there, a huge one.
That's Rove money. So do you think that was a subconscious thing, turning a house into a fucking restaurant?
Everyone did it.
In the pandemic?
I think it was just, everyone was looking around their house and then they felt that they needed somewhere safe to be. They want their friends around, and it's so stupid because we know it lasts for a small period of time. But and then that will stay. So the reason for doing it's gone. It's fucked off completely. But for the next 8 years, we will see this. Yeah, people go, I really want that. Yeah, right, a chandelier, or I want those gold things, and I want those things, and they won't even know why they're doing it. So. That has changed. So it used to be that, if you did a bathroom, you'd get maybe 7 or 8 years of it looking really, really still modern. But now it's maybe 2 years, maybe 3 years, because the cycles change so quickly because of Instagram.
Yeah, it's like every
pregnancy and Instagram.
Like it's almost like every new build has this kind of door on it.
Oh yeah, with
like,
this sort of
with the 4 horizontal windows.
Yeah. The Sunshine Coast door.
They're very popular at Doors Plus.
Every house, mate. That's putting the Doors Plus people through private school.
Well, it's no fuss. Can you tell me what do you think is? I mean, it is funny that you say these moments as well. Apart from these migration waves or these economic emancipation of an entire state, which created the bling factor in WA, we also have these moments in time where it was like. The pandemic. It was Cyclone Tracy up in Darwin. They had to build that whole city again.
Yeah.
What did they do there?
Well, then you end up just with buildings that are
safe.
That are safe, yeah. There are ones that survive, but you do see, you lost a whole bunch of buildings.
Yeah.
It's only a small place, though.
The Greeks made so much cash up there.
But if you look at what totally defines what we do and how, and this is what I believe anyway, what we do, how we build, how we behave, is all based on, what we think. When you go to Bunnings right on the weekend and it's busy, everyone goes to Bunnings. Everyone loves Bunnings. So what does that Bunnings really tell us about us? It's more than just we like sausages.
Extreme convenience.
And we do, and then it's important that we have a crack at everything, and if we don't, try to knock up a deck when we're not qualified, part of us dies and falls over as a country. But what it really signals to us is that we're addicted to change. And so if I said to you, if you could go as a kid, could you go to the same restaurant you went to when you were 10 years old and it looked the same, if it still existed, the answer would be, unless it's maybe a Chinese restaurant, probably the answer is no.
Yeah.
In Europe, in America, you can go to a restaurant that looked the same for 100 years and they love it. Not for us at all.
No.
And what drives that is our insecurity. So we've been constantly, for the last 200 plus years, trying to show the world that we're not a backward place.
And so it's a cultural deficit.
Yeah.
And we still have that gold rush kind of mentality that once that we're all trying to find something.
Yeah, and even at even at the peak, right, of the gold rush in Melbourne. So Melbourne's the most modern city in the world. They've got the World Exhibition going there.
Yep.
They've got the exhibition building there. Right? So it's there. Everyone wants to be there.
Yeah.
The focus on the world is in Melbourne.
Yeah.
Planned city, the most amazing. And then they're getting this obscure role to come out to open up the exhibition buildings. And then straight away they get paranoid because we have awnings on all our buildings because of the climate. But they don't need them in Europe. And they go, we don't want them to see that we've got awnings and everyone will think we're backwards. So they picked up this obscure royal from down on the docks and they removed all the awnings all the way up to the Windsor Hotel and then all the way up to the exhibition building. Clip, clop, didn't see any of the awnings. And as soon as he left, they put them back up again. And we've been doing that ever since. We still cannot feel that we are okay with our lot. And so there is nothing that destroys heritage in this country alongside greed other than insecurity.
Hello, it's me, Wendell Hussey, jumping in here quickly because Clancy Overell has peeled off to the RSL. Hope you enjoyed the chat. We're actually splitting it up into two parts. The executive decision was made. It's a longer interview this week. So tune in next Monday to hear part 2. Talk to you then. Bye-bye.